Happy Sunday, everybody. This is Zach at it again. I'm your host, Zach Cooley, and I have on the phone with me a very illustrious member of the journalism community, the retired professor of mass communications at Emory and Henry College, Teresa Keller. Thank you, Teresa, for being with me today.
Well, it's a pleasure, Zach. I appreciated the invitation.
Well, I should mention that invitation. You and I were connected through my colleague and your former student, Miss Jasmine Franks, who is a regular reporter with the Whitfield Enterprise and Smith County News and Messenger. I'm a freelance editorial writer.
It's nice for you to mention Jasmine because I am so proud of her that she has really become a journalist in the truest sense of the word. And there was a recent story, I won't go into any detail about it, but it was a national story, and she was doing some initiative reporting on that story from the slight connection that she had to the issue, and did some things that made great revelations. She is really inspirational to me these days. So I'm glad you get to work with her, and I'm proud of her and appreciated the connection to you.
Well, that is fantastic because it'd be 7 years ago this coming fall now, Jasmine did a story on me and a book that I wrote on my father's 50 years in law enforcement. So when I published that, Jasmine did a story on it, which, obviously was very important to me. So I greatly appreciate her doing that for me.
She knows a good story.
And for the book, yeah, yes. Certainly does. But anyway, we are connected so that we can talk about Barbara Walters. And Barbara is one of the most preeminent members of the journalism community. She is a legend in every sense of the word. She passed away on December 30th, 2022 at the age of 93. What is significant about Barbara Walters for me is that when I was being born 15 weeks prematurely, which would eventually end up having me diagnosed with cerebral palsy, and it would render me in a wheelchair for my entire life. But the moment I was being born, she was on the TV doing a Barbara Walters pre-Oscar special. And I had an aunt that said, when I told her that I was born when that was on, she said, "Well, no wonder you like all that award crap, because anytime an award show was on, I was always watching it." And my mother and I watched the Oscars together almost every year that we were together. So So I was watching the Oscars literally from day one, and Barbara Walters. But I didn't know that Barbara Walters was special until I was asked in the 10th grade to do a report on somebody that was in my what we hoped would be our profession once we finished high school. And I didn't remember at that point that I wanted to be a writer, but evidently I did, because something in my mind went to Barbara Walters, and I found that her most inspirational stories were about disabled people. She interviewed a blind and deaf couple that was very preeminent in one of the blind deaf schools in the country, and her interview with Christopher Reeve following his debilitating accident. She said those were her most inspirational interviews and the ones she would want to be remembered for, and that stemmed from her having a mentally challenged sister. And I thought that connection with her being so connected to people with disabilities, I thought, well, maybe that's why I'm so drawn to her. But the reason I wanted to talk to you is that you are a female in the community of journalism, and Barbara Walters was one of the first in her field to be a female. And she started as a writer on the Today Show, and then she went to be the first anchor woman at ABC News. I was appalled when I looked back today at the remarks that her co-anchor, Harry Reasoner, the remarks that he made in, quote, welcoming her to the news desk.
Yes, and I am familiar with that clip. And I do remember the rocky relationship that they had, and I remember and how disturbing it was to me at that time.
Mm-hmm. Having heard that just as a human being, I was quite appalled. I would be surprised that they would let something like that today. I don't even know if they would let that happen today. And that was the run-of-the-mill feeling at that time.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's quite a shame, because Barbara Walters brought more to the medium. If you ask anybody who's been alive in the last 50 years who Barbara Walters or Harry Reasoner are, which one do you think they're going to recollect off the top of their head?
Yeah. Well, this was a thing that women had to put up with, and I have been described as, I don't know, things that the characteristics in men would be admirable.
Right.
Strong, passionate, opinionated, driven, those kinds of things. But when you're a woman, and back then, especially, it was even worse, because women weren't supposed to have careers in that time. They didn't. A working woman who has a career, what are you talking about? Doesn't she want to get married and have babies? And if she doesn't want to get married right now and have babies, what's wrong with her?
Right.
And men were and are threatened in the situations where they're not accustomed to being around strong women, sitting around the table and having a woman express an opinion in as passionate of a way as they do and not back down on their opinions. That stuff was threatening. And the other thing, like what you're describing, that clip where Harry Reasoner says that to Barbara Walters, and what does she do? She kind of chuckles and grins. That's what we did. Mm-hmm. The sexism, we kind of smiled at it. We kind of brushed it off. And in the bigger sense, Zach, we didn't see it. When I was in graduate school, I had a professor say to me, "Have you experienced sexism?" And do you know what I said? I said, "No, I don't think so. I think I've been, I've done okay. I don't feel like I've been held back." This was at a time when the New York Times women reporters were filing lawsuits because they weren't being paid the same as men, and because they were designated to do women's stories. Eleanor Roosevelt said, "I want a woman reporter to cover me." I mean, they weren't hiring women. They weren't letting them cover the stories. I wasn't paid the same when I was in television or when I became a professor. We just accepted it when we even saw it. Mm-hmm. We just didn't realize, because we've been raised to be nice and be grateful for the opportunities you have, and don't push back and don't make waves and don't make trouble. And, for the most part in my generation, in my life, I didn't. And now I see women today who are so empowered, who just like, "You said what to me?" That kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It's just, there's been a lot of advancement, but in those days, that chuckle and smile back at him that you saw in Barbara Walters, mm-hmm. That's what we all did for decades.
Mm-hmm. But anyway, she faced a lot of hardships as a woman and being one of the first. Would you say that as a woman or just as a journalist, has Barbara Walters affected your career in any way?
Well, when you asked me to do this interview, I started thinking about that, and I don't really know the answer. I think that maybe her influence with me was subconscious. I knew that, as far as my career was concerned, I knew that I loved her specials. I knew that I loved how she asked tough questions. And, later I found myself in front of a camera doing television for 7 years and was in, all kinds of situations, interviewing all kinds of people. And I always thought that I was supposed to ask tough questions. I knew that some people shied away from them. I knew that people are so afraid they're going to hurt somebody's feelings that they back off and don't ask the question that they really want to know. I think that that's something that maybe just seeped into me from watching her, and also Jane Pauley, who followed her some years later on the Today Show. And so I grew up watching these women, in the national spotlight, asking tough questions to people in power. And it's not a typical way that women are taught to behave. And so I was lucky that nobody told me early on or in a way that influenced me, back off, be nicer. I think that's what I was supposed to do. And I have prided myself in that over the years, in asking tough questions to people, and have come to believe that it's not necessarily a tough question. It's maybe a sensitive issue that maybe people don't want to talk about, but they will, and they will get comfortable and answer your questions for the most part. So in that way, I think she just seeped into my system.
Well, and I'm glad that you used the word subconscious, because obviously the connection between Barbara Walters and myself, I make $12 a week, she made $12 million a week. Obviously the connection between the two of us was more of a subconscious thing. But let's talk a little bit about you and your career, since I haven't really completely read up on you and your career history. You want to tell me about where you came from and how you got into the journalism field?
Sure. I kind of stumbled along life and just took doors as they opened to me. I hadn't made any plans about college, and I was very active in the 4-H club in Washington County, Virginia. I grew up on a farm. I had a cow of my own that I raised, and I sewed clothing and did cooking recipes for the 4-H club and that kind of stuff, and entered speech contests and had all kinds of opportunities there, and went to a national thing about a speech presentation, the first time I was ever on an airplane. So because of that activity, through the 4-H Club, King College in Bristol offered me a free tuition scholarship. So that just decided that. So I went there. The other thing is that I think probably connected to Barbara Walters in a sense is that in the age we grew up, and she more so than me, I didn't have a lot of vision for what I could do because I didn't know that a woman could be a lawyer. I remember thinking I'd like to be a lawyer because I was argumentative. That's what I thought it meant. And I just didn't think it was a possibility. I thought if I tried to do that, people just think I was trying to get attention. So when I graduated from college, the only options, for most people were teacher, nurse, and secretary. And so, of course, I became a teacher. And I taught high school for 3 years. I felt like 110 years old. I can't do this. I got to do something else. So I went to graduate school, and after graduate school, I came back home, and there was a job opening for co-host of a television show. And I had done theater when I was in college and in grad school, and was thinking, okay, this is what I can do. I can co-host a talk show, and danged if I didn't get the job.
And this was a television show where?
It was at WCYB TV in Bristol.
Okay, so it was a local regional.
NBC affiliate of the Tri-Cities. And so I found myself, hosting this talk show. It was an hour-long monstrosity. It was up against two national celebrities. One was Phil Donahue and one was Dinah Shore. Nobody's going to remember those names.
Oh, I know them both very well.
Do you? Well,
yeah.
So the station hired a new news director who came in and saw that show and went, what the ding-dong is this? And moved me into news and gave me an interview segment within the news. So it was like, either you're going to adjust to news and do news, or we're going to have to let you go. So that's how I got into journalism, really. That's just where the chips fell, and that's what I had to do. So I worked there for 7 years. I forgot to mention the part about getting a master's degree, but I had gotten a master's degree before the TV thing. And so with the master's degree, when I was tired of working on holidays and didn't see advancement because I was female. I didn't see a female anchor. I couldn't envision that. Not sure I had the will or the confidence to pursue that anyway.
And what time period was this?
Let me think. When I went to Emory and Henry was in 1985.
So that's the year I was born. So we're talking about the mid '80s. You did not envision a female anchor at that time.
Right. I could not envision myself doing that. It's just what, when people talk about role models, I think that is so important, that you can't envision yourself doing something that you haven't seen somebody else doing, or at least a lot of people can't. And that was my position. So I loved teaching, but I knew I just couldn't do it on the public school level because it's just exhausting. And I thought, well, I can teach on the college level. I have a master's degree. And they hired me at Emory and Henry to teach mass communications, television broadcasting, which, everybody knew me because when you're on the air in one of the major affiliates in a market area, everybody knows you. And so they gave me a chance and hired me and told me when I took the job, when I interviewed for the job, that I would have to get a PhD. So that's what I did. And I turned that 7 years of working in television into a lifelong career as a teaching journalism, teaching video production, teaching television. I have a book on video storytelling, news and video storytelling. And so that's kind of then where I landed. And now my pride and joy is the students I taught who are setting the world on fire, like Jasmine and like people in journalism and television and nonprofit work and businesses all over the country. I have six Emmy Award-winning graduates from the work that they've done.
Fantastic. Do you want to name any of those?
Well, let's see. I don't know if I can do it this quickly off the top of my head, but I had Tyrone Bachman, who won an Emmy in Atlanta. Sheila Evans won an Emmy for her work on 9/11, 2001, from the ABC News Desk in Washington, D.C. Bonnie Widener, who has Emmys from Washington, D.C., another station where she's Director of Marketing and Public Relations. Jay Webb, who was working on a weather story in Harrisonburg, Virginia. 1, 2, 3, 4. Joel Hilton in the Virginia Beach area. And I think maybe that's all. That's 5, but one of them has 2 Emmys.
I suspected that you were a PhD, but I did not say in my introduction, Dr. Teresa Keller. I should have done that. So.
Well, that's quite all right. But yeah, that was the hurdle that they made me jump through before I would get to stay. And in fact, you get to stay for every 7 years things turn over. So at the end of my 6th year, in the spring of my 6th year, I hadn't finished the degree, and the dean called me in and wanted to be put in touch with somebody at the University of Tennessee who could verify that I was on track to finish my degree, because they would have had to give me notice that the next year was going to be my last year if I hadn't finished.
Right. And also, when you're in local affiliate network television, it's very typical, is it not, that you travel around. It's not very often that one gets a position and stays in a position for 30 years and makes a career in that one spot. They're typically going from one end of the country to the other.
Recruiters generally do, yeah. But since I was an anchor, I mean, I probably could have stayed, but it just, I mean, I was a noon anchor and reporter, so I could have probably stayed if I had wanted to, and I don't know. But when I joined the newsroom there was only one other woman, and she was ready to retire. She'd been one of the first women in television in this market area. So that was new too. Here, I am this inexperienced TV person suddenly finding myself in a newsroom, and the male anchor had been there for 20 years or 25 years, and I don't know, that was a whole thing too of adjusting to all of that. And I guess the TV medium gives you credibility, I've got to say. I mean, it gives you power, because when you're in television like that, if you make a phone call, people are going to answer. And, you have the power of the station behind you. So, I don't know, maybe that's something that Barbara Walters, Jane Pauline, even little old me in little old Bristol, Virginia, you have power just because you're working there.
People see your face every day.
Yeah.
And of course, I come from a place where I am a person with a disability. That is, I take as much pride in my $12 a week columns as I would if I made $12 million, because I was afforded the opportunity to have my own editorial column, which is exactly what I envision myself doing. I make a lot of jokes about how I don't make any money doing what I'm doing, but it's exactly what I envision myself doing, and I'm afforded the opportunity to do that, and I'm very grateful for that. However, I know that I'm seen by many companies as a liability, and this wonderful government that we are in the United States, if I make so much money, I lose benefits that unfortunately I need to rely on, like Medicaid, to pay my necessary medical expenses. So that limits me in how I can advance in my career, and those are things that I face myself, and and I see people like Barbara Walters, and I like to think that maybe somewhere, somehow, I'm making a difference in the disabled world. Maybe somebody will read one of my little columns, and maybe I will make a difference in their life if they want to be in the journalism field, or if they just want to express an opinion. In today's world, anybody can say anything and click a button and it goes out to the world,
Right. Do you have time for me to tell you a story on disability issues?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're going to love this, because it's an example. I always told my students, every legal case is because somebody fought. So I always say, raise hell, raise hell. And then I just gave you the example of these women who had to sue to get the jobs that they deserved.
Right.
Well, Emory and Henry was hosting a debate between two congressional candidates. One was Rick Boucher, and I can't remember who was running against him at the time. But anyway, we had the debate scheduled in the auditorium, which was not accessible. So I was up in my seat, settled in, and this woman came through the back doors of the auditorium, storming down the aisleway. Who's in charge here? My husband's in a wheelchair, and he can't get up here, and that is unacceptable. And you know what? Somebody had offered, we can carry the wheelchair up the stairs. And she said, carrying his wheelchair is not adequate. He needs accessibility. If you're having this event for the public, he needs accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it. It blew my mind. But that kind of raise hell. Well, let me tell you, that was never an issue at Emory and Henry again. They never had that issue, and accessibility issues got addressed and corrected, and they put in an elevator in that building. So I thought you might appreciate that story.
And there are still so many things, like very simple things. Like I wanted to get on the Polar Express train in Gatlinburg. And they said, well, only if you're in a wheelchair that you can get out of. If not, we can't help you. And that, to me, is not acceptable. I have as much right to see these things and do these things than anybody else. But nobody thinks, if this person is this dependent by anybody else's standards, I should be in a nursing home. But, 12% of people, based on the statistics I've seen, 12% of people with cerebral palsy marry, 5% have children. And I own my own home. I pay my own bills, not through money that I make, but my wife is on disability for a heart condition. My daughter draws off of her, and that cumulative amount means that I don't draw a check because the government says, $2,100 a month is too much money for a household of three. So I don't draw a check. My $12 a week, my $60 a month that I collect from the Whitfield Enterprise is mine to do with as I see fit. The rest belongs, but never mind that. I have been married for almost 13 years to a wonderful wife. We pay our mortgage, and I have a beautiful, healthy, smart, intelligent 8.5-year-old daughter that I could not be prouder of. So I understand that I'm fortunate to be where I am, but I do know that things need to be changed, and things still need to be better than they are. So,
well, congratulations on all your accomplishments. That really is impressive, and you are making a difference by talking about these issues and raising people's awareness and in fighting your own fight. You're making a difference for everybody.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me. As I said, it's been really nice to talk with you and to connect with you, and I hope that we'll talk again. Now that you have a book, I'm going to look it up and read it. So,
all righty, that sounds good. Go for it.
You look me up on Amazon too. I've got some books I'd like for you to take a look at.
Well, I appreciate that offer, and I appreciate your taking the time to have me on your show, Zach.
Well, it's as I said, it's been nice talking to you, and I wish you great enjoyment of your retirement. It sounds like it's you've earned it.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And thank you again for talking with me. It's been so nice having you.
Okay, you take care. We'll talk soon.
You too. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.